Hi, I'm Lauren Hollows, and this is Understand TAE's question of the week. And this week we are dealing with how to use third parties to collect assessment evidence. So this differs from the third party arrangements that we've talked about in the past, which relate to standards 2.3, 2.4, and 8.3. This is in relation to where you've got an assessment process and you're using a third party, such as a workplace supervisor or something like that, to collect supplemental evidence to support your assessment decisions. So this is something that RTOs get wrong a lot, mainly because of the processes that they put in place and the assessment tools that they use. So there's a couple of things that you guys need to understand in relation to, this obviously comes back to standard 1.8 in relation to conducting effective assessment. So there are ways that this can be done correctly. A lot of RTOs will turn around and say, oh, look, we just don't do this anymore. We find it too hard, so we're just going to you're just going to say we just don't do it. There are ways and situations where you can do it effectively, but you need to spend the time setting up the process correctly first. So a really good example of where RTOs can use this and use this effectively is when training package qualifications have got large numbers of hours in the workplace that need to be validated. So, Cert 3 in commercial cookery, Cert 4 in commercial cookery, Cert 3 in early childhood education and care, diploma of nursing. These are all qualifications that require significant hours to be demonstrated in the workplace. So one of the ways that you guys can do this really effectively is by having assessment conducted, undertaking it by your assessors to confirm that all of the other skills and knowledge in the unit are actually assessed and observed by the supervisor. And then when it comes to the quantity component, that component is what is then supplemented through using a really effective observation tool or logbook that gets included in industry. So to give you an example with something like the Cert 3 in childcare, you may have them complete all of the skills necessary for those units. They may undertake observation. Your assessors either may conduct that in a simulated environment, or they may ideally go out and do 3 or 4 or 5 workplace visits where they're actually watching the students participate in the skills and knowledge and demonstrate their competencies in relation to the specific skills and knowledge of the units. Then when it comes to supplementing the hours and the tasks that need to be undertaken, you're providing a really clear logbook. You're providing very clear guidance for the supervisors that are going to be conducting the observations on site. And then you follow up the receipt of that logbook with phone calls to the supervisors to confirm the skills and knowledge have been demonstrated and to confirm that the hours have been completed. Some of the areas where people go wrong is that logbooks don't contain enough detail. So it's literally like a 1-pager or maybe 5 pages in total with documenting the hours and not really giving a whole lot of other detail. So this is very common in the Cert 3 commercial cookery. You've got to specify whether it was a breakfast, lunch or dinner shift. You've got to specify whether it was a la carte or table d'hote service. You've got to specify what dishes they were cooking at the time and things like that. So you've got to make sure that when you're collecting that evidence that you're still ensuring validity in relation to all the skills and knowledge of the unit. The other thing that you've got to do is understanding that these are not necessarily qualified trainers and assessors that are going to be making these observations. You've really got to be clear on the language, so you cannot say things to the effect of the student followed the WHS policies and procedures. Okay, you really need to contextualize it to the observable things that they're going to be seeing in the workplace. So we want to be saying things like the student chose the correct PPE, and in the case of a chef, that will be their chef's uniform, long pants, their chef shirt, steel toe boots, a hat or skull cap, beard nets and things like that if appropriate, and gloves. So you want to be really clear in relation to the levels and standards and provide those really clear benchmarks that are expected from that industry perspective. Another way that we can use this really effectively is when we're doing things like counseling qualifications, when we're doing things like underground mining or, confined risk, confined space, things like that, where you've got situations where it may not be safe for an assessor to actually go into some of those work sites. The induction process doesn't allow it. Patient confidentiality doesn't allow it. These sorts of tasks. Now, where you're going to struggle to, you might be doing this in a simulated environment. If the training package doesn't allow the simulated environment, you really need to be sure that you're getting as much evidence as possible. If you're going to be doing something like that and you actually can't really do an overly valid assessment on them in a simulated workplace, what you do need to be doing is you need to be trying to provide and collect some additional indirect evidence. So when I say indirect evidence, I mean things like portfolios, I mean things like documents. So, as an example, if we're doing something like counseling, you might ask for a copy of case notes that have been redacted. So they'll be redacted to protect the confidentiality of the patient, and that will be overseen and signed off by the workplace prior to them providing that to you. So it's indirect evidence, it's portfolio evidence, which supports the observations that have been made by their supervisor in the workplace, okay? So it's really important, as I said, at the end of the day, we're still coming back to these principles of assessment, rules of evidence. And validity is a big one. We're not including enough detail with relation to what, what actually needs to be covered, what detail needs to go into these logbooks and documents and things like that. We're not covering it in relation to authenticity. So, how are we actually ensuring that it happened? Are we making phone calls to the supervisors afterwards? Are we asking for video or photographic evidence? Are we asking for a portfolio of evidence and documentation to follow it up? All of these things contribute to the assessor's ability to be able to ensure that they're making a valid decision. We also want to make sure that the person that is making that determination is actually qualified. So when we start to look at this, we need to start to look at what qualifications do they have? Are there qualifications that we're going to mandate that they have? Do they have to hold the specific unit of competency? Do we want them to have so many years experience? One of the things that we need to be really, really careful of, guys, is you cannot have people co-assessing each other or co-signing off. So if you've got 3 or 4 supervisors in a workplace that are all undertaking the same qualification, you can't have one signing off on the skills of the other, because as the assessor, you haven't been able to deem them competent yet. So you really do need to be ensuring the process of, does the workplace supervisor, are they suitably qualified? Do they understand their responsibilities? Effectively, this does tie into 2.3 in a way that you need to be ensuring that all of the parties have a very clear knowledge. You're taking some of that training and assessment and you're outsourcing it to someone, and you need to ensure that they have the skills and knowledge to be able to make those same determinations. So you want to get a copy of their CV if possible. You want to get a copy of their qualifications. You want to be having a discussion with them beforehand. You want to provide them with some very clear guidance through an assessor or a third-party workbook or handbook, so that they know specifically what their roles and responsibilities are in relation to the process. So look, as I said, coming back to it, there definitely are ways that you can do it and we can make it work, and it can be a really valid form of evidence. In some cases, it's the only way you're going to get it. But what you guys have got to come back to is looking at, through that planning process, when you're setting up the TAS for it, how are you going to make sure that the training package requirements are met? How are you going to make sure that the evidence is going to be valid? How are you going to make sure that all of the parties, the students, the assessors, the third-party supervisors, understand their roles, their rights, and their responsibilities? If you guys are covering off on all of those, then you're doing the right thing, and it can be a really great way to conduct assessment in a really valid format, get some great evidence, and really put that training and assessment into context for students who are getting that work experience and going into the workplace. I hope this helps. Thank you very much, and have a great weekend. Bye.